Pick up on this conversation now. Former eThekwini Mayor Zandile Gumede's pre-trial hearing has been heard in the Durban High Court, and her trial is now set for 18 July, while the party's National Executive Committee previously ruled that members who are facing criminal charges should step aside from their duties in the party and indeed in government structures. The ANC in KwaZulu-Natal says it cannot implement the step-aside rule in its current form. Joining me now for this conversation is the party's provincial secretary, Mdumiseni Ntuli, who joins us from KZN. Mr. Ntuli, thank you very much for your time. I think for viewers to be able to understand and follow logically our conversation about the step-aside rule, let's start with Ms. Gumede's ongoing court case. Pre-trial hearings were heard today and a date has now been set for the trial on the 18th of July. Does she occupy any positions of responsibility as things stand, including her being part of the officials in the provincial legislature?
Well, good morning, Ntuli. Good morning to the viewers at home, and thank you very much for having us on the program. Well, Comrade Zandile, as you know, is currently a member of the provincial legislature here in the province, and that is the only position that she is currently occupying. We had appointed her as one of the members of the regional task teams when we appointed the RTT almost 3 years ago. But a responsibility that she subsequently had to relinquish or to step aside on the basis of the decision of the organization for those who are currently undergoing court cases in order to remain in the leadership position of the African National Congress. So that is the current situation about her.
All right, so she is currently a member of the provincial legislature. Does that mean that she is still in her duties? She is fulfilling her duties in the legislature. Being a member is one thing, but being active in your role or position is quite another.
She does attend sittings of the legislature, because unless she does not attend, I mean, if she were to not attend the sittings of the legislature and to participate in the work of the legislature in general, I'm quite certain that there will be nothing that justifies her earning some form of income by virtue of being a member of the provincial legislature. So she has always been part of the legislature. The position adopted by the ANC was that those who are required to step aside, in case they are members of any of our legislatures, the first thing that has to happen to them is that they must then resign from any responsibility attended to them as a consequence of being a member of the legislature. So if you are an MEC, you are a chair of a portfolio committee, you are a whip, or any responsibility of that nature, you relinquish that responsibility and remain an ordinary member until such time that the case has been finalized by the court of law. So Comrade Zandile belongs to that category.
All right. So she is earning her salary, and indeed she is participating fully in her duties. Is she prohibited, Mr. Ntuli, from contesting any positions right now within the ANC, given that she is undergoing a court case?
The direct answer would be no, she is not prohibited. But let me explain why I'm responding it in that way. Sometimes last year when we were preparing for regional conferences, we sought a guidance from the head office of the ANC about whether or not comrades who are implicated and are going through some cases should be permitted to stand as chairpersons, secretaries, and BEC members in various branches in our province, including in the structures above branches, which is your REC. The guidance we received from the leadership at that time was that in terms of our rules in their current form, there is nothing that is explicitly prohibiting a member from being nominated and subsequently, if that member succeeds, get elected into the position of responsibility in the structures of the ANC. As a consequence of that, we allowed, together with the national leadership of the ANC, the former mayor of Newcastle to be re-elected as a chairperson of the region while he was still on a stepping aside condition. Of course, fortunately, something that few months later was then cleared because the case that was against him was then cleared in the court of law. But the basic principle was that when we sought the guidance of our national office, was that there is nothing in the rules, and we were seeking that guidance because we also have understood that in terms of the rules, there was nothing explicit that says you do not qualify to be elected. But what was concerning to us, which I think is important for me to explain to you, was that being elected into positions of responsibility is not just the occupation of the position, it's a responsibility that is attended to you occupying a position. And our view was that it would be meaningless. It doesn't make sense for a comrade who is on the step-aside condition to be elected into the position to immediately step aside. But we said, as a province, we can't make that decision. We're not a national province. We need the head office to give us their own guidance as to whether we should instruct those comrades never to accept leadership responsibility in the structures of the ANC. And the guidance was that the rules have not been articulated to that direction. Hence, we allowed, as I said, that example in Newcastle and also other comrades who were elected into branch executive committees.
So as things stand, Mr. Ntuli, because of that lack of clarity from the head office of the ANC about the step-aside rule and how it should be applied to those people that may want to contest positions of responsibility. As things stand, in KwaZulu-Natal, no person can be prohibited from standing for any position, despite the fact that people like Zandile Gumede are undergoing very serious court cases about very serious crimes.
As a provincial executive committee, Ntuli, we have absolutely no authority to say to any of our members, by virtue of being charged and undergoing a court case of one form or another, you are disqualified to be elected into the position of responsibility. Because when it is not explicitly articulated in the guidelines, we avoided a temptation of using our own interpretation as a provincial leadership, which I've already given you a sign of that interpretation in our own view, because we were concerned that how would a comrade be elected merely to step aside? It doesn't make sense, it's illogical. But we said, look, we can't make that decision. These are not provincial guidelines, they are national guidelines, and we need national guidance in terms of how to deal with it. So until such time that the national leadership of our movement explicitly direct provinces on how to manage this, in case it has to be managed differently, we are not in the position, because what would we use? We can't say in terms of our understanding. The rules are written down. They should not be subjected to individual interpretation of different leaderships across the provinces.
Yeah.
They must be clarified by the national office so that there is a common interpretation and a common adherence across the organization as a whole.
Mr. Ntuli, viewers listening to us would have followed this conversation. I think it's as simple as anyone would think. I think it's fair to conclude, therefore, that the ANC is morally bankrupt. Do you agree?
I don't agree with you on that, and I'll explain my disagreement with you. When we began with the process of the selection for councillors, for public representatives, the National Executive Committee took an effective decision. It did not say, by implication, because you are on step aside, you can't represent the ANC as a public representative. It took an effective decision that everybody who is currently undergoing a court case must never be considered into the list of those who are going to become public representatives after the 2021 local government election. So that was an effective decision. It was not by implication, and hence it was universally applicable and implemented throughout the country. I don't think that because of the lack of clarity on this aspect that we're talking about, we can convincingly conclude that therefore the ANC lack moral bankrupt. I think it lacks clarity on these aspects of its own guidelines, which I think the national leadership is quite capable of addressing and helping us in the movement as a whole.
Mr. Ntuli, part of the step-aside rules or guidelines, and you'll correct me if I'm interpreting it wrong here, is that even before you are forced to step aside from your role, whatever role you occupy in the ANC and by extension positions of responsibility in government, it is incumbent upon you as a leader to talk to yourself, have a conversation with yourself, so to speak, and say, morally, how is it going to look if I go and contest a position when I have a cloud, and more so, I'm undergoing a criminal trial here. So how does it make sense for you to even think about contesting a position?
You are quite correct, Ntuli. You are quite correct. Each one of us, as individual members and leaders of our organization, have a responsibility to talk to our own conscience and consciences about the extent to which the situation confronting us will impact negatively in the prestige and the standing of the African National Congress in an event where you are considered as one of the leaders. But where I hold a different view from you is when, therefore, the inability of the individual to make that kind of a considered reflection and come to a correct position must therefore be attributed to the organization as a whole, being caught up in what is called moral bankrupts. I think it may very well be that some of our members and leaders would have a difficulty to insulate themselves and their personal interest to those of the movement. And I think we have to deal with that as part of the exceptions rather than dealing with it as a normality or as a rule within the organization as a whole.
Perhaps let's conclude the conversation, Mr. Ntuli, with this, I suppose, a summation of what your chairperson intimated. I think it was on the occasion of Human Rights Day, that South Africa's constitutional democracy perhaps should be tilted towards a parliamentary democracy or parliamentary system, I think he said. And there has been lots of criticism about that this is actually dishonesty on the part of Sihle Zikalala. What motivates that? And is that what the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal is in agreement about, by the way?
Well, Ntuli, I haven't really followed the comments that followed what the provincial chair of the ANC had said. He, like many of us, who are frustrated about the trajectory of our dispensation, what's happening in terms of the laws of our country, some of the challenges that we're picking up within the judiciary, what at some point we've defined as a failure of the judiciary to rise above what may be political consideration in terms of making decision, is what, in my understanding, entices a frustration among many of our leaders, including the provincial chair, as a result of which then thinking emerges about aren't we supposed to consider a different trajectory in terms of our dispensation as a country. But I do want to indicate that the chair made that statement that matter has yet to be debated in the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC. It's not necessarily a policy position adopted by the PEC. I would want to assume that this may be part of the contribution of the provincial chair and many others who may agree with him to the current discourse around the policy formulation as we prepare for the National Conference of the ANC. But it's not a position of the ANC. And of course, if we're to take the route that the chair has advocated, it means that there will have to be a thorough assessment of the path we chose in 1994, which to a very large extent, if not entirely, was as a result of the policy positions adopted by the African National Congress. And if the ANC as a whole would come to the conclusion that some of the decisions that were made must be reviewed to that direction, I think it's a matter that we must subject to the conversation in our country and within the movement itself.
Mdumiseni Ntuli, thank you very much for your time.